Today, we're looking at managing chaos, but on two completely different scales. It's fascinating.
Wildly different scales, yeah.
On one hand, we are dissecting the astonishing fragility of our digital world.
Yeah.
I mean, the July 2024 CrowdStrike software failure just laid it all bare.
And then on the other hand, we're jumping from that digital chaos to something even bigger.
Exactly. We're diving deep into these massive high-stakes efforts being mounted globally to intentionally intervene in the most chaotic system we know, the Earth's atmosphere, through things like cloud seeding.
So our mission today is really to connect those two themes, which they seem so far apart at first glance.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack how one faulty software update can just paralyze global infrastructure. We have to ask, why are our systems so vulnerable?
And then we pivot.
We'll examine the absolute cutting edge of geoengineering using modern reports from places that are really feeling the pressure, the UAE, India, Iran, and we'll ground all that with this incredible historical document we found, a 1979 U.S. government report on the history of weather modification.
It's a fantastic source. And taken together, they give us this unique lens, to view human ambition. They show us precisely where our attempts at control just unexpectedly broke down.
Right.
And where science is now deliberately trying to harness natural processes to secure basic resources like water. It's a deep dive into the cost of complexity, both digital and environmental, and the absolute need for resilience when you're facing both.
Okay, let's start with the event that made the fragility of modern life just terrifyingly real. The summer 2024 CrowdStrike incident.
Yeah, this was the big one. We're talking millions of Windows computers across every single sector you can imagine crashing at the same time.
Yeah.
All because of one tiny faulty configuration file.
The scale was just mind-boggling. It wasn't, a few computers slowing down.
No, this was a total system shutdown, a digital pandemic almost. We saw it grounding major airlines. Delta was the big one in the headlines, but it was happening everywhere.
Stores closing.
And this is the critical part. Essential services getting knocked offline. Major banks, healthcare providers, emergency communications, all of it just gone for days.
It really exposed a vulnerability that I don't think most people or even most companies truly understood existed at this scale.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And when we talk about scale, we have to talk about the money. The financial impact here is it's eye-watering.
The numbers we have for Delta Airlines alone are staggering. They estimated they lost $550 million.
$550 million over 5 days, just because they couldn't process payments, couldn't manage logistics, couldn't fly their planes.
And that's just one company.
That's the baseline. Insurers, financial analysts, they're all predicting the total economic fallout, the social losses.
Yeah.
It easily runs into the billions, globally.
It's important to put this in context, too. This wasn't a one-off black swan event, in a way.
No, that's a great point. This single bug just highlights a much bigger, often invisible problem. Software errors are a massive, constant drag on the economy. Our sources show that in 2022 alone, just in the U.S., software errors cost businesses and government agencies an estimated $1.8 trillion.
1.8 trillion.
Trillion. So the CrowdStrike incident didn't create the problem. It just put a giant, unmissable spotlight on this systemic fragility that's been there all along.
And what's so crucial to remember is that this wasn't a cyber attack. It wasn't some hostile state actor.
It was an own goal, a completely unforced error, an internal quality control failure.
So to understand the chaos, we need to get into the technical weeds a little bit. The culprit was CrowdStrike's Falcon software. Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Sure. Falcon is a critical piece of cybersecurity software. It's all about threat detection. And it's used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. It's a cornerstone of corporate security.
Okay, so what was the exact point of failure? How did this happen?
It all came down to their update mechanism. You see, CrowdStrike maintains its protection with two different kinds of updates.
Okay.
First, you've got the core Falcon software itself. That's tested, incredibly rigorously. It's a major release. But second, and this is the key part, you have what they call rapid response content updates.
And these are different.
Very different. These are tiny configuration files. They have to be deployed automatically and really instantly to fight off newly discovered cyber threats. The speed is the whole point. But that speed, it comes with a huge structural risk.
And that's where this idea of the kernel trap comes into play. We really need to unpack this concept of kernel space versus user space to get why this was so destructive.
Absolutely. Think of your computer's operating system, like Windows, as having two distinct zones, two levels of security clearance.
Okay.
Most of the apps you use every day, your web browser, your word processor, they all run in what's called the user space.
Right. And if my browser crashes, my whole computer doesn't shut down.
Exactly. The operating system isolates it and says, okay, that one program failed and it shuts it down, but everything else keeps running. The kernel, though, the kernel is completely different. It's the absolute core, the command center of the entire OS.
So it's managing the CPU, the memory, everything.
Everything. It's the bridge between your hardware and your software. It has the ultimate authority.
I've heard the analogy that if the kernel is the foundation of your house, the user space is just the furniture.
That's a perfect way to put it. If a chair breaks, you throw out the chair. The house is fine. But if the foundation cracks and collapses, the whole house is gone.
And the whole house collapsed here.
The whole house collapsed. And here's the crucial part. Cybersecurity software like Falcon has to operate with kernel access. It's not a choice. It's a necessity of the job.
Why, though? Why does it need that level of access?
Because to catch sophisticated new threats, it needs to see everything. Every single process, every interaction with memory, every piece of data flowing through the system in real time. Its power, its effectiveness, comes from being at that core level.
So you have this inherent tension. It needs deep access to be effective, and it needs to be updated instantly to be relevant.
Speed versus accuracy. That's the tension. And if one of those rapid content updates, the ones that have to be pushed out in minutes, has a bug in it, that bug gets a front row seat with total control over the entire operating system.
And CrowdStrike's own internal review found that the failure wasn't just in the update file itself, it was in the system designed to check the file.
That's right, and that's what's so damning. They admitted the problem was a bug inside their automated testing tool. The very tool designed to scan these rapid updates for errors failed. It missed the error.
So the machine designed to police the machine broke down.
Precisely. And that allowed this faulty file to just propagate across the globe in minutes. Now, to their credit, CrowdStrike issued a fix within 90 minutes.
90 minutes is pretty fast.
It is, but by then it was too late. Over 8.5 million devices were already bricks. They were unusable. And because the kernel had crashed, the computers couldn't connect to the internet to get the fix automatically.
Oh, wow. So you had to physically touch every single one.
You had to have a person, an IT staffer, physically go to each machine, reboot it in a special mode, and apply the fix manually. For a global company like Delta, that's not a 90-minute job. That's a days-long logistical nightmare.
This just throws such a harsh spotlight on these systemic vulnerabilities, specifically this problem of centralization, what experts are now calling excessive concentration.
Right. And when you look at who got hit the hardest, this problem becomes so obvious. Delta's CEO came out and said they were the heaviest user in their industry of that specific combination. A Windows OS protected by Falcon's security solution.
How much of their system was affected?
60%. 60% of their mission-critical applications went down because they had streamlined their vendor relationships for efficiency, which makes sense on paper.
But in practice, it created a single point of catastrophic failure.
It's the exact opposite of resilience thinking. Resilience runs counter to that kind of hyper-efficiency.
And then, of course, the finger-pointing started. We got this really controversial angle from Microsoft.
We did. Microsoft basically suggested that its hands were tied, that its systems were so vulnerable because of a regulatory mandate.
They blamed a 2009 antitrust agreement with the European Commission.
Yeah, they claimed this agreement forced them to give equal kernel access to third-party security firms, like CrowdStrike. And they implied that this prevented them from building a safer, more locked-down environment, like Apple does with its ecosystem.
That feels like a bit of a legal deflection, doesn't it?
It sounds a lot like shifting blame from your own architectural design to a regulatory burden from over a decade ago. I mean, if your operating system is the foundation that literally the entire global economy relies on, shouldn't your responsibility to protect users be paramount?
You would think so. Many experts are certainly arguing that. They're saying, look, Windows is the world's most used OS. It has this incredible complexity. It has to run millions of legacy programs.
Right.
So maybe revoking kernel access isn't feasible. But shouldn't the manufacturer of the system, Microsoft, have to architect it so that a single error from a third party can't bring the whole thing down?
The fact that the entire system crashed really points to a fundamental architectural vulnerability within Windows itself, regardless of who wrote the buggy code.
It seems to force a mandate for systemic resilience. If you have to grant that kernel access, then you also have to build in safeguards, some kind of segmentation, so that if one piece of kernel-level software fails, it doesn't take the whole OS with it.
It's a shared responsibility model.
So if we accept that 100% security is impossible, what does this resilience thinking actually demand from companies using this tech? What's the lesson here?
Well, first, on the vendor side, CrowdStrike has already changed its process. They've implemented what they call a staggered deployment strategy for these rapid updates.
So they don't push it to everyone at once.
Exactly. It doesn't hit their entire global client base simultaneously. They can release it to a small percentage, monitor for failures, and stop the rollout if something goes wrong. Plus, more rigorous quality assurance, obviously.
And for the client, for you, the listener, running a business, it sounds like it requires a total psychological shift away from just thinking about pure efficiency.
Absolutely. It means you have to actively design redundancy into your systems, even if it adds cost, even if it adds complexity. It might mean using different providers for different critical systems, resisting that urge to put all your eggs in one vendor's basket.
And maybe the most important lesson came from the anecdote about the airlines that actually coped the best during the outage.
The ones that went back to pen and paper.
Pen and paper, it's almost unbelievable.
It's incredible. But they had well-documented, well-rehearsed physical backup procedures. Manual, non-digital processes ready to go. That's real resilience.
It's an acknowledgement that the most sophisticated digital systems will fail, eventually.
And your plan for recovery has to be independent of those very systems. We have to stop trying to solve every digital problem with another digital solution. The CrowdStrike incident proved that learning from these breakdowns and actually embedding that learning into real-world non-digital policy is the only way forward.
Okay, so that was the digital world collapsing because of a tiny, unforced error. Now let's flip the script completely and go to the opposite extreme. The deliberate, massive-scale attempt to manage chaos by intervening directly in nature.
From fixing software bugs to engineering the sky.
Exactly. The ambition here is it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
We're talking about cloud seeding. Can you give us the basic definition?
Sure. At its core, cloud seeding is the technology of spraying microscopic particles into clouds to give water vapor something to condense onto.
Okay, so what kind of particles?
Most commonly, it's silver iodide, which has a crystalline structure very similar to ice, so it acts as a great freezing nucleus. Or, in warmer clouds, they use simple salt, which is hygroscopic. It just attracts water molecules.
And you just spray this stuff from planes?
Typically from aircraft, yeah, or sometimes from ground-based generators in mountainous areas. The goal is to encourage the formation of raindrops or ice crystals, and by doing that, enhance or even trigger rainfall that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
And this is not some small-scale science experiment anymore. This is a big and growing global market.
A huge market, and it's being driven by the intense pressures of climate change and especially water scarcity. The growth rate really tells the whole story. The global cloud seeding market was valued at around $380 million in 2023.
Okay.
The forecast projects it to expand to nearly $670 million by 2032. That's a 6.5% compound annual growth rate. That's serious money.
And that growth is tied directly to, what, national security?
Absolutely. It's about national resilience. Nations are desperately looking for durable water solutions. They're trying to mitigate wildfire opportunities in dry regions and, of course, secure water for agriculture when weather patterns are becoming so unpredictable.
So how has the practice changed? How has it evolved beyond just, flying the plane and dumping silver iodide out the window? What's driving this market growth technologically?
The shift is all about moving from a blunt instrument to a surgical tool. And that surgery is powered by data. The key market trend right now is the integration of AI and autonomous technology.
So it's not reactive anymore, it's predictive.
That's the goal. Machine learning is essential for identifying the precise, optimal conditions in a cloud. You're looking at cloud temperature, height, liquid water content, all these variables. AI can analyze that data in real time and say, okay, that cloud right there is the perfect candidate for intervention.
And that makes it more efficient.
It dramatically improves the predictability of the outcome, and it lowers the operational costs. You're not just flying around hoping for the best. And a big part of that is drones.
So we're seeing autonomous UAVs take over the seeding process. What kind of sensors are guiding them?
They're being guided by really sophisticated analysis tools. The combination of LiDAR and radar is critical.
Okay, break that down for us.
So radar is great at detecting precipitation structure, where the rain or snow is and how it's moving. But LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging, can give you incredibly high-resolution measurements of the atmosphere itself. It can tell you the amount of liquid water content in a cloud and even the size and distribution of the tiny cloud particles.
So you know for sure if a cloud is ripe for seeding.
Exactly. This granular data lets operators confirm that they're only intervening in clouds that have enough of that supercooled water to actually be responsive to the seeding agent. It's all about maximizing your chances of success.
Let's look at where this is actually being deployed. The most advanced programs happening right now. The leader in these hyper-arid regions seems to be the UAE.
The UAE is a global pioneer, no question. They're conducting upwards of 1,000 hours of seeding operations every single year. For them, this is about absolute water security. It's an existential issue.
So what's their latest push?
In March of 2025, they collaborated with an AI weather tech startup to launch a fully autonomous program. It's using UAVs that are programmed by machine learning algorithms to identify the best opportunities for salt seeding.
They use salt, not silver iodide.
They're focusing on environmentally friendly salt as the agent, And their goal is to generate a 10 to 25% increase in rainfall across their target regions. It's a massive state-sponsored effort.
And in India, they're using similar tech, but the focus is different. It's about agriculture.
Exactly. In India's Maharashtra region, which is frequently hit with water scarcity that is devastating to farming, a company called Raintech Solutions launched their AI-based precision seeding platform in early 2025.
And what does that platform do?
It brings together satellite imaging and real-time cloud profiling data. Then it uses drones to precisely target specific areas to maximize rainfall efficiency right where it's needed for the crops. It's very targeted.
Meanwhile, in Australia, they're not using it for drinking water or farming, but for energy.
Right. Snowy Hydro Limited in Australia uses cloud seeding in their cool, mountainous environments, specifically to maximize snowfall.
To build up the snowpack.
To build up the snowpack, which then melts and feeds their hydroelectric power generation system all year round. The recent upgrade in June 2024 was all about those precision tools we just talked about, using LiDAR and radar at the same time to confirm optimal conditions and maximize the snowfall yield. It's about sustainable energy.
And finally, a really clear sign of environmental desperation, Iran.
Iran launched its own operations in late 2025, and it's a direct response to the worst drought they've seen in decades. They're focusing on the Urmia Lake Basin, which is drying out at an alarming rate.
The numbers are pretty stark.
They're shocking. They suffered an 89% decrease in rainfall compared to their long-term average. It was the driest autumn in 50 years. This isn't a minor problem, it's an absolute crisis.
And significantly, they're not importing the technology.
No, and this is a key geopolitical point. Iran announced it had developed its own domestic technology for the practice. That signals that weather modification has now become a strategic national security priority for any water-stressed nation. They want to own the capability.
This level of ambition, though, inevitably clashes with public perception, which brings us to the biggest controversy in this space. The record torrential flooding that hit Dubai and Oman in April 2024.
Right. And as soon as the videos of flooded highways started spreading, the public speculation immediately blamed the UAE's cloud seeding program.
It became the dominant narrative online. They played God, and this is what happened.
And this is where you see this collision between public trust in geoengineering, climate science, and infrastructure failure. But the speculation was crucially debunked.
How so?
The UAE's own National Center of Meteorology came out unequivocally and stated that no cloud seeding missions took place on the day of the torrential rain.
None at all.
None. They went further and explained that it's standard critical safety protocol not to attempt seeding during severe weather events. It's just too dangerous and probably ineffective anyway.
Okay, so if it wasn't the seeding, what was the actual scientific cause of that much rain in a place that's defined by its lack of rain?
It was an exceptionally heavy rainfall event, but it was driven largely by global climate factors. A climate analysis of the event found that human-induced climate change made that specific storm 10 to 40% more intense than it would have been in a cooler climate.
And it happened during an El Niño year.
Which amplifies those effects.
Yeah.
So the rainfall was extreme, yes, but it wasn't unnatural. In fact, it was actually well forecasted by meteorological agencies days in advance.
Wait, if it was forecasted, why was it so deadly? We saw at least 20 fatalities in Oman and 4 in the UAE. This is starting to sound less like a failure of weather prediction.
And more like a failure of urban planning.
Just like the failure of digital resilience we saw with CrowdStrike.
That is the profound critical insight here. It was a resilience failure against a predictable natural force. The problem was high exposure combined with completely inadequate infrastructure.
What do you mean by high exposure?
In both the UAE and Oman, between 80 and 85% of the entire population lives in flood-prone, low-lying coastal and urban areas. These cities grew incredibly rapidly in hyper-arid zones, and that development often failed to account for these kinds of extreme, even if rare, weather events.
So the ground itself can't absorb the
The
water.
soil has very limited permeability. It's baked hard. And the urban drainage systems, the pipes, the canals, were simply not built to handle that volume of water. The failure wasn't in the sky. The failure was in the pavement and the piping on the ground.
It's the same pattern. In the digital world and the atmospheric world, it seems like we invest billions in the most sophisticated, high-tech interventions like CrowdStrike Falcon or AI-powered seeding programs.
While neglecting the fundamental boring defenses.
The automated software testing, the adequate urban drainage systems, the stuff that isn't glamorous but actually works when things go wrong.
That modern context, this clash between high-tech intervention and basic infrastructure resilience, gives us the perfect jumping-off point to look back at the history of this ambition.
Right.
To see the moment when this technology started to outpace public understanding and the legal frameworks that were supposed to govern it.
Okay, so let's wind the clock back nearly 50 years. We're going to 1979, and looking at this U.S. Department of Commerce report to Congress, it was a comprehensive review mandated by the National Weather Modification Act of 1976. They were trying to map out the future of weather control.
And the foundational conclusion of that report was incredibly optimistic. I mean, astonishingly so. It stated very clearly that effective weather modification technologies were expected to yield substantial economic and societal benefits.
And that these benefits would likely outweigh the costs by a significant margin.
Right. This wasn't framed as some fringe science. It was being presented to Congress as a potential economic engine for the country.
So what were the specific benefits they were projecting that fueled all this optimism back in 1979?
They really honed in on three major areas of potential gain. First, and most obviously, was water management.
Sure.
Delivering critically needed water for farming, for irrigation, for hydroelectric power, and for cities, especially out in the drought-prone western U.S.
And the second one was for aviation.
Yes, they projected huge economic benefits for the aviation sector just by dissipating fog at airports. And that was a technology they considered proven, even back then.
We'll get to that. And the third one.
The third, and maybe the most commercially compelling one, was hail suppression, substantially reducing property damage from hailstorms. At that time in the late 70s, crop and property damage from hail already exceeded $1 billion a year in the U.S.
$1 billion in 1979.
Exactly. So imagine being able to just wipe out that cost with targeted intervention. It seemed like a miracle technology. Okay, so 45 years ago, where did the science actually stand? What was in the proven column versus the promising but not quite there column?
Only one technique was definitively proven: clearing supercooled fog from airport runways.
What is supercooled fog?
It's fog, where the water droplets are still liquid even though the temperature is below freezing. They just need a nucleus to freeze onto. So seeding it with freezing nuclei was incredibly reliable. The military had tested it, it was operational, it just worked.
But the big prize making it rain or snow on command for farms and dams, that was still a much harder problem.
Absolutely. Precipitation enhancement was classified as promising. The most successful area was something called orographic cloud seeding.
Okay, what does that mean?
You have to picture the geography. Orographic clouds are the ones that form when moist air gets pushed up and over a mountain range. This creates a really stable, predictable, and continuous cloud system. So you introduce the seeding agents on the upwind side of the mountain. And that stable environment is the key, right? It's much more predictable than, say, a random thunderstorm popping up on the plains.
That's the whole key. You have controlled environment.
Yeah.
And the data from randomized research projects in the U.S. were showing precipitation increases as high as 20% in favorable conditions.
But there's a catch.
There's a big catch. Success depended critically on the temperature inside the cloud. There was this Goldilocks zone for that supercooled water. You needed cloud top temperatures between -11 and -20 degrees Celsius.
What happened if it was outside that zone?
If conditions were too cold, say colder than -26 Celsius, or if the winds were too strong, the seeding could actually backfire and cause precipitation decreases. The science was not foolproof. It required pinpoint accuracy they didn't always have.
And what about rain enhancement from those big, puffy cumulus clouds, the kind of thing Israel was working on?
That was even more varied. Israel's project had the most statistically convincing result. They claimed a 15% precipitation increase and had moved to operational status by 79. But there was a nuance. Scientists found that while you could conclusively stimulate the growth of a single cumulus cloud, make it taller, make it rain harder, the ultimate predictability of increasing rainfall over a large area was still frustratingly uncertain.
So the ultimate scientific conclusion of the 1979 report seems to be that they had some solid techniques, but they were missing the foundational understanding.
That's it exactly. The science hadn't yet reached that level of, quote, objectivity, repeatability, and predictability that you need for new scientific knowledge. Really fundamental processes, like how ice even forms and grows in the atmosphere naturally, were still poorly understood.
So they were basically running ahead of the science.
The report stressed that they needed more quantitative theory, better computer models, and more small-scale field experiments before they went off and started these massive, expensive field projects. The ambition was there, but the pure science still had a lot of catching up to do.
And beyond all the scientific hurdles, the report details this incredibly intense legal maze that's created when you try to modify something that, by its very nature, crosses every border: the weather.
The legal questions were a nightmare then, and they're still a nightmare now. Weather modification inherently raises these complex issues about state lines, about international borders, because of what they called extra area or downwind effects.
Right, the classic question: if you make it snow more in Colorado to fill the reservoirs, have you effectively stolen water vapor that was supposed to fall as rain in Kansas?
Or if your cloud seeding operation is followed by a freak storm that causes a flood, who's liable for the damage? How do you prove it?
And the practical reality in the courts at the time was you couldn't. No one could actually win one of these lawsuits.
That's right. The core legal challenge was causation. No plaintiff up to that point had ever been able to successfully prove the definitive causal link needed to win damages. How do you prove, in a court of law, that a storm wouldn't have been just as bad naturally? The scientific uncertainty was the ultimate roadblock for the legal system.
So, to manage that uncertainty, the report pushed for proactive public regulation, which is fascinating. What kind of rules were they proposing to manage the risk, even if you couldn't prove it in court?
They were aiming for professional accountability. They knew this was a powerful technology. So the model codes they proposed required three specific things.
Okay.
First, professional licensing for weather modifiers to make sure only competent, trained people were in charge. Second, operational permits for each specific project, which would require detailed plans, target areas, and crucially, emergency shutdown procedures.
And the third piece was about money.
It was. They required proof of financial responsibility, usually through an insurance policy or a corporate surety bond, specifically to cover potential liability. It was a way to mitigate the risk even when legal causation was scientifically ambiguous.
And this whole regulatory push was driven by this powerful realization, a quote from the Weather Modification Advisory Board, that the weather is inherently transnational.
The atmosphere doesn't respect maps. It was a simple but profound statement. The U.S. realized that what it did within its own borders could have immediate geopolitical consequences.
So the policy goals became about managing those international relations.
Exactly. Emphasizing collaboration, promoting peaceful uses, minimizing tensions. The report recommended creating bilateral agreements for notification and consultation, and they cited the one they already had with Canada.
Which Canada initiated.
Because they were worried about commercial seeding operations happening in the U.S. right near their border. It shows the tension was already there.
And the clearest, most dramatic example of that international friction was the cancellation of Project Storm Fury.
That was a huge moment. Project Storm Fury was the big one. The goal was hurricane moderation.
How would that even work?
The idea was to seed the eye wall of a hurricane with silver iodide. The theory was that this would cause supercooled water to freeze, release latent heat, and disrupt the storm structure, widening the eye. A wider eye means lower maximum sustained wind speeds, which would mitigate the most catastrophic damage.
And the U.S. wanted to move these experiments from the Atlantic to the Western Pacific.
Right, because there are more active typhoons there, so more opportunities to run the experiment. But the plans were scrapped completely.
Why?
Because of strong official reservations expressed by the governments of Japan and China. They were terrified of the unintended consequences.
What if the experiment accidentally diverted a storm and it made a direct hit on their coastline?
Or even worse, what if the U.S. was blamed for a storm's natural path, regardless of whether the seeding actually changed it or not? The diplomatic risk, that fear of being blamed for natural chaos, was enough to halt a major scientific program in its tracks.
And that fear of blame is the exact same dynamic that fueled the immediate public speculation after the Dubai floods in 2024. It never went away. We've seen that managing these incredibly complex systems, whether they're digital or atmospheric, requires this constant process of learning and building resilience. Let's move on to three quick, high-impact advances that are defining technological change right now.
Okay, starting with transportation. Shifting away from fossil fuels in these specific high-emission niche areas is just critical if we're going to meet climate goals.
Which brings us to maritime transport and the sea change. This is the world's first commercial hydrogen fuel cell ferry, and it's currently running a pilot service in San Francisco Bay. Why ferries? Why target them specifically for this transition?
Ferries are a surprisingly high-impact target for decarbonization. You look at the numbers for California, for instance. They only make up about 2% of the harbor craft, but they're responsible for a disproportionate 15% of the total emissions from those craft.
Why so high?
Because of inefficient diesel engines that are just running constantly right near major population centers. So hydrogen fuel cells offer a distinct advantage over, say, battery electric vessels in this specific sector.
And what's that advantage?
It's all about energy density. Hydrogen provides what you need for longer trips and, crucially, for faster refueling cycles. A commercial ferry can't afford to be docked for hours recharging batteries. It needs to refuel quickly and get back on its route.
But what about the fuel itself? Because hydrogen can be produced in different ways, right?
That's the important distinction, yeah. Right now, the sea change is likely using what's called gray hydrogen, which is produced using fossil fuels, so it still has a carbon footprint.
So what's the long-term goal?
The true long-term objective, the real tipping point for this technology, is the commercialization of zero-carbon green hydrogen. That's hydrogen produced by using renewable electricity to split water. This ferry proves the fuel cell system is technically feasible. The next step is for the industry to scale up that sustainable hydrogen supply chain.
Okay, next up, a breakthrough that could fundamentally change how we diagnose and treat a devastating disease. The blood test for Alzheimer's.
This is genuinely revolutionary. Researchers are rapidly reaching a point where a simple, inexpensive blood test can accurately measure the specific biomarkers associated with Alzheimer's disease.
What biomarkers are we talking about?
We're talking about the key proteins like amyloid beta and different forms of the tau protein. These are the hallmarks of the disease that build up as plaques and tangles in the brain, and now we can detect fragments of them in the bloodstream.
But how accurate can a blood test be compared to something like a PET scan, which was always the gold standard?
The accuracy is astonishing. New assays are being developed that perform nearly as well as, and in some cases just as well as, an expensive and invasive PP scan or a spinal tap for identifying these markers.
How does it do that?
It measures specific ratios or modified fragments of these proteins that directly correspond to the pathological changes happening in the brain. The impact of this is profound because it makes early diagnosis accessible and affordable. It moves it out of specialized neurological clinics and into your primary care doctor's office.
And that early identification is everything when it comes to treatment.
Precisely. Having these quick, accurate tests is already streamlining clinical trials.
Right.
It lets researchers track how well new drugs are working with much greater precision. And when you combine that with this new generation of drugs that can actually slow the progression of the disease.
Which work best when they're administered early.
Right. So these blood tests could radically change the entire course of Alzheimer's treatment and the quality of life for millions of people. It's a game changer.
Finally, let's jump into a very controversial, but maybe necessary, area of artificial intelligence. Using AI for end-of-life decision-making.
This is a technology focused on dignity and preparedness when someone becomes incapacitated. The concept involves creating an AI-powered digital twin.
A digital twin, what does that mean?
It's a model that's trained on a patient's personal data, their medical history, their expressed values, things they've written, past decisions they've made. And the goal is to help doctors and family members predict that person's end-of-life care preferences when they can no longer communicate for themselves.
That immediately raises huge ethical flags. I mean, how can a machine truly know if someone would want palliative care versus aggressive intervention?
That is the core of the debate. It's controversial. The data has to be handled with extreme care, and the weight of the decision is immense. But researchers are moving forward because the current reality is often just guesswork, made by stressed family members with limited information.
So what's the evidence that this can even work?
Well, rudimentary models based on generalized patient data have already shown promise. They've been able to predict patient preferences for medical care, as well as, and sometimes even better than, their own close family members.
So the hope is that by training the AI on highly personalized data, that specific patients' life decisions, the model could become far more accurate.
Yes, that's the hypothesis. That a truly personalized model can increase the accuracy dramatically, providing a measure of predictive certainty in a time of incredible uncertainty. The goal isn't to replace human decision-making.
It's to supplement it.
It's to provide a robust, data-driven proxy for the patient's own voice, to make sure their autonomy and dignity are maintained even when they're unconscious. It's a very urgent application of AI that's forcing us to grapple with some profound ethical questions about who we are and what technology can be.
This entire deep dive has been just a forceful reminder that we live in a world that is dominated by complexity, and that complexity can be engineered by us or it can be inherent in nature itself. We saw the profound fragility in our centralized digital systems, where one tiny, faulty file from a single company can bring global travel and commerce to a catastrophic halt.
And then, on the flip side, we examine these immense, ambitious efforts by entire nations to manage chaotic natural systems like the weather. These efforts are supported by AI, by drones, by high-tech sensors.
And yet, they're still subject to the uncontrollable forces of nature. And when those forces combine with something like inadequate infrastructure, you get devastating events like the Dubai floods.
The key insight we have to take from all this is that complexity, whether it's digital or natural, it leads to unavoidable vulnerabilities.
So whether you're debugging a piece of software or seeding a cloud or just preparing a city for a flash flood, a robust response requires more than just better tech.
It requires what the experts are calling resilience thinking. That means resisting the temptation for maximum efficiency and instead intentionally building redundant, diverse, and crucially non-technical plans for recovery.
The $1.8 trillion cost of software failure proves that paying for redundancy up front is a lot cheaper than paying for a catastrophe after the fact.
Exactly. Resilience is about the manual procedures. It's about having diverse vendors. It's about building robust drainage pipes. It's the boring, unsexy infrastructure that truly saves the day when the sophisticated systems inevitably fail.
So after looking at how much effort goes into engineering the world around us, from the core of our operating systems to the very atmosphere above us, here is the final provocative thought for you to carry forward.
The sources make it clear that we are increasingly expected to manage chaos in our world. So the question for you is this. What essential layer of chaos, be it a digital single point of failure in your workflow or an overlooked infrastructural weakness in your personal or professional systems, are you overlooking or underprepared for right now?
Think about where your systems rely too heavily on one single point of control.